Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we discuss feminist issues in music and pop culture, all while empowering fangirls.
Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And today, we are getting candid with Vacations.
So if you're new here, welcome to Name 3 Songs. You're listening to our artist interview series, and we've gotten to talk to some really exciting artists for this series so far. Jenna and I have really been enjoying getting to dive into artist interviews again. And recently we spoke to Ben Roeder of the New York City rock band Quarters of Change. We got to talk about how New York City is such a special place when it comes to music and how rock music is really happening here again, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And on top of that, just getting to discuss with him the importance of being vulnerable as an artist in your art. I think it was very cool. And honestly, just one of my favorite conversations we've had.
In addition to that, we also recently talked to Charlotte Sands, who's a pop rock artist. And last year she got to open for 5 Seconds of Summer. And it was honestly so cool to hear her talk about her experience opening for 5 Seconds of Summer, because she wanted to tour with them so badly purely because she loves their fan base. And that is just so wholesome and recognizing fangirl culture for what it is, which is exactly what we care about.
Yeah.
So we had a really fun time talking with her and getting to hear her story of connecting with Five Sauce fans during the tour, as well as the fact that she's putting out her debut full-length album on January 24th. And we got to hear the stories of the music she's been working on and how this is the most vulnerable music she's made throughout her career.
And so along with this artist interview series that we do, we also have weekly episodes of our podcast where we discuss pop culture news under a feminist lens. And this past week's episode, we were specifically focusing on how Ariana Grande and Lil Nas X both had singles come out that stirred up so much controversy on two very different levels, because Lil Nas X was causing controversy with the people who love religion, and Ariana Grande was causing controversy because she forgot that when you're famous, everybody pays attention to everything you do. And she's like, not me. And it's Ari, girl, you're being scandalous and you're a public figure. What do you expect?
My favorite part of all this is Ariana making a diss track for the general public.
She really was just you're paying too much attention to me. It's stop being the most famous woman ever then.
So if you guys want to hear our full thoughts on that, we have new episodes every Wednesday. And come chat with us. Come hang out on Instagram, on TikTok. We love hearing your thoughts and feelings. If you liked this episode, if you want to hear us interview other artists, if you want to come discuss pop culture with us, we are here for all of it. We are at Name 3 Songs on all platforms if you want to come chat with us. And with all that being said, now we are getting candid with Campbell Burns from the band Vacations. They're an Australian indie rock band back with their third studio album, No Place Like Home, which came out earlier this January. The album sees Vacations exploring ideas of loneliness, relationships, the idea of home, as well as Campbell's own diagnosis with pure OCD. Last year, the band toured across the globe, playing shows in America, Europe, Singapore, Indonesia, and I think they have so much more exciting stuff ahead of them in 2024.
So we're getting candid with Campbell from Vacations about how the band broke out of the Australian music bubble through using SoundCloud, as well as the importance of being honest with your mental health struggles in order to be the best advocate you can be when it comes to discussing mental health and just being open about it, as well as just breaking the image of the untouchable rock star, which I think was my favorite part of this interview, because Campbell's who, me? A rock star?
He's we're all just dudes. We're all just dudes duding.
We're all just dudes being a dude. And I was he gets it.
Respect.
And so with all of that, let's go get candid with Campbell.
Hello, Campbell. Welcome to the show.
G'day. How you doing?
Good. We're so excited to have you on. Jumping right into things. Vacations had a really massive 2023. You pretty much played all over the world, including America, including Europe. You even got to go over to Singapore and Indonesia for the first time. And now you've just released your third studio album, No Place Like Home, and you're headed out on a festival circuit in Australia as well. many things happening. Many things have been happening. Many things are going to be happening. Have you had a moment to soak it all in and pause and relish in what's happening?
No. No, I don't think I really have. And I think it's a really interesting balance of trying to recognize what rest is and what work is, and trying to find that sort of lifestyle balance, because I moved to Los Angeles in May of last year after traveling for about 5 or 6 months straight, just with no fixed address, living out of my suitcase. And even though I've been here since then, I've probably spent maybe a max of 2 weeks at home just because of the constant travel, touring. It's a lifestyle that's very up, very down. And it's almost kind of confronting when you come back home and your tour's done or the album's done. And now you're like, what do I do with myself?
Yeah. You're like,
even
what
though it's
now?
like even though when I'm on tour, it's like, I want to do the most mundane human things possible. I just want to like go buy groceries and make myself a nice meal, do my laundry, make my bed, read a book, or just sit and do nothing. Like, crazy concept, but those are things that I miss. But then it's like, when you actually get it, it's like, oh, this is weird. So I'm just trying to learn how to, I guess, rest and relax, which is something I feel like I'm very good at, especially also being a tourist. But it's just like, it's tricky when you're just also constantly on the road, and that's kind of what you know.
I'm just like, it's like the idea of sitting still being far into someone is an interesting thing to think about. But I mean, like, as Jenna said, like, you guys have been constantly on the road, so it definitely makes sense. But on top of that, like, you guys have been a band for like close to a decade now, which is crazy.
Which is weird. It's really weird to think about. Well, because I started, it wasn't even a band. It was just like a project, like an outlet for myself, because I started writing songs, and I had a Tumblr account at the time, and I kind of miss Tumblr in that sense. It felt like such a slow, patient, like almost like mindfulness social media platform. But it's like myself and like my best friends, and it's like, I'm just going to post a song and share it to like my like small corner of the world on the internet. And it was sort of a great testing ground for that. But slowly spiraled, and then people joined and it became a band. And it's weird to think now that it's almost been a decade, but we feel like we're still so young as a band.
So in thinking of you guys having been a project for, 10 years now and like different variations of that at the start, I'm really curious because coming from Newcastle, Australia, sometimes Australia is like so far away that it feels like its own creative bubble. So for you, when you started this, did it feel like touring the world was something that could be a reality for you?
Absolutely not. Almost naive and kind of cute to reflect on, but I really only thought about my music in the proximity of my hometown and my friends. I did not see it even traveling as far as Sydney, which, for context, who's listening, it's a city that's 2 hours away from Newcastle by car. So I just didn't even think about it. I don't know. I was in my own little world, just playing DIY house shows, going to gigs all the time, just really invested in my local music scene, my community, which is funny because it's like, obviously being a child of the internet, of course, music can travel so far, but it's not where my head was at. I never thought like, oh, like someone in America could be listening to it, or someone in Russia or Argentina or whatever. Like I was really like, this is what's here and what's in front of me. I'm going to engage with this, which I think is a positive thing.
I mean, it's really interesting because I think a lot of musicians who start in smaller cities, and especially in America, if you're not in like a Nashville, New York, or LA, it can feel like I'm just doing this in the present for my immediate friends and my personal happiness. But how do you think it started to expand beyond just like you and your community in your city?
Because the second EP, Vibes, came out December 2016. And then I think in January of 2017, a few people on YouTube, like, which is such a golden age for music as well, and like bedroom pop in particular. But there were a few people on YouTube that had a following and would just be constantly uploading music. Probably the most prominent person I can think of is David Dean Birkenhart. He had like a huge YouTube channel, and he would upload our music, and then we started getting traction, and like I was just like getting exposed to all these people commenting on our music and being perceived in that way for the first time, which was very overwhelming but exciting. I think like through that, and also SoundCloud, when that was really like prominent, like
I
because
agree.
Outside of the whole mumble rap wave, there also was a really big bedroom pop scene. So it was kind of through that. It's like that's almost like the first wave of it before you get to like the whole TikTok virality, which is like times 10.
So you mentioned this like idea of being perceived, and I think that that's really interesting because like also to us in America, it's like Australia is so far away, and like Australia as a country, all of the cities itself are so far away from each other.
I know what you
too.
think of us.
No, I'm not saying it in a bad way, but all of the cities are also so far away from each other. So I'm sure like that can feel quite isolating in its own sense. And so going from being like not only in a like smaller town, but in a small town in Australia to like all of a sudden being perceived online and now being perceived in like an even bigger way. Like how has that felt going from just being like, oh, like I'm just going to like be on Tumblr doing this to all of a sudden being like perceived internationally?
I think it's important to find ways, and this will differ from everybody, but finding ways to stay grounded and present in the moment. Just really trying to practice mindfulness and create some distance between yourself and that online sort of persona. If anything, touch grass, essentially.
Yeah.
if you want to be really blunt about it. But no, it's very easy to get. And I remember initially back in 2016, as we started, or 2017, as we started getting small taste of virality through YouTube and SoundCloud, it was very easy to sit there all day and just read comments and hit refresh and ruminate and allow those comments and those opinions to sort of dictate not only your art, but then also your lifestyle. Like it can affect you, but you can, like my way at least of creating that distance is, I mean, one, trying to use my phone less. But for instance, when we did have a lot of that TikTok virality with Young and then telephones and, you know, still going today, my version of that was just creating the worst possible content, just making really bad memes, like just making really awful memes, because it took zero effort, but it maximized like potential reach, audience engagement. Like it was ticking every single box. And so
that's great.
A lot of people were just like, oh, this band's really funny, or oh, this is just really like genuine or sweet because it's down to earth content. It's not like, I think TikTok especially, like that's really geared towards like, you have to want to be a personality. And for some people that can work, but that's already tricky enough as a solo artist. If you're a band, then there's a whole bunch of you. And it's like, how do you balance that in a way where everyone feels included and everyone has representation and everyone connects with the project so that they can make good art? Like it's such a weird thing. But I guess doing it for so long now and having like gradual levels of being perceived, like having those initial stages of like YouTube or SoundCloud like success, and then kind of keep slowly building. It's not like it was like a huge overnight thing and then it's like I've got a million people on me. It's like a very slow process. And I think during that time I've also had like a lot of personal experiences that have informed how I carry myself, or I've just become more confident, and I think that helps with being perceived.
Do you feel like you have an artist persona?
Like a character?
Yeah, like, or a stage persona or something that's like separate from like who you are as Campbell when you're not being perceived by people.
Nah.
No.
I don't know. Maybe like, actually that's a good question. That's like do I put on a mask or something?
Yeah.
Or like a superhero type beat, like I'm Batman. No, I don't really think so. I guess there's a part of myself that like is inherently different when I'm around Joey, Jake, Nate. They bring out qualities of myself that would be like, that is Vacations. It's the four of us. We're kind of this boy band, but I don't think I try to put on any kind of, if anything, I'm trying to find ways to break that down, because I'm just like you. And it's like, I don't want to be this like fucking rock star.
Untouchable.
Like, it's not pleasant. I don't enjoy it. Like it's weird.
Okay. So we're getting into a lot of things that I really love. And I think we're going to circle back on some of this here, but I do want to get into your album for a minute. So No Place Like Home obviously grapples with a lot of big topics, was primarily written during like pandemic years, you know, mental health being one of those topics. But I want to talk about this overarching theme of like quite literally no place like home. And the idea of, you know, being a full-time musician, it comes with spending a lot of days on the road, which, you know, you experienced a lot last year. And being in this kind of constant state of transition is not something that a lot of people experience. And like from my personal experience, I spent a couple months abroad, and I remember how weird it was to like constantly be moving around. And I feel like friendships became really weird because of that. So I can only imagine like for you, what it's been like with this being part of your job and having to kind of navigate relationship dynamics.
It is a tricky balance. I find that settling into Los Angeles has been interesting, especially when I am constantly traveling and I am constantly touring. And it's almost like there's this lifestyle that I know I could have, and I could be very grounded and just carry out my day-to-day here. But I'm, like I said earlier, the most amount of time I've spent here consistently has been 2 weeks. So trying to find a community or foster that community, make friends, which as an adult is surprisingly hard, which I just have never had to encounter before, because this is the first time I've moved.
It's hard for people who live in, like, making friends as an adult is like hard, even if you live in the same city all the time. Like,
it is really hard. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about a lot more, because at the end of the day, everyone just wants to feel accepted for who they are, and it's tricky. It's very tricky. I think as well, it's almost as if I have been conditioned in a sense to be touring, to be constantly on the road, and that is a lifestyle that gives me stability and routine, even though it is the most chaotic lifestyle you could possibly have. And I don't think a lot of people could do it, and that's a good thing. You shouldn't want to be doing this. Just constantly going from one city to the next, changing time zones, always being surrounded by people, not having your own space. But it's what I know. And so again, like when I do finally get to stop and slow down and try to practice that, it's this very confronting, weird realization. And there's almost this part of me that's like, oh, okay, I think I could just keep touring. Or I think I could just keep doing something else. Like I need to keep moving. So the idea of actually stopping for a second and actually being back here is bizarre. But I will say like it is getting easier. I've actually been really excited to come back home to Los Angeles after being in New York.
I mean, so I know like 2022 and 2023 were like very busy for y'all, but thinking of like COVID, like 2020 happening again, a time when the future of live music is so precarious and just unpredictable. And like, we didn't know if it was going to come back. Were you dealing with kind of like the same emotions then of having to be in the same place, or was that not as much a feeling based on like where you were in your career at the time?
Girl, I don't know. I was so depressed because we had just dropped our second album, Forever in Bloom, during the pandemic. And we were really excited about it because it was an effort that we were really proud of. And we felt like it really showcased who we were as artists and individuals, but we couldn't tour it. And then at the same time, Young became the biggest song of our whole discography, which came out like what, 4 years ago, like prior to that. So it was this weird, like, what do we do kind of thing? And it just sort of felt like the whole project was in limbo for like the next year or two, which is why I hit writer's block and I really struggled to write anything because I was like, I don't know what this project represents anymore. Felt like I lost a sense of my individuality and I was like, well, what is my voice? How do I connect back to that? So something that did help during that time was that I started pursuing songwriting and production for others. And because there was some degree of separation, that was actually really helpful. And I think taking a break from a project like that and working with your friends and working with other people and just seeing how other people work was able to help inform my own creative process. And I was able to grow as a person as I was like sharing these stories and hearing other people and what they were going through. So that was really helpful. And then like as the world started to open up again and we were finally able to tour, that first US tour, like March 2022, like just completely changed everything because finally it's like we weren't seeing statistics on a screen because the record label obviously during the pandemic was like, oh, you hit a new milestone, you got like 10,000 more players, and it's like this doesn't
what does that
like, mean anything to me.
At a certain point it's just like, well, it's like I've got more Instagram followers, like or it's like, ooh, I got more likes on my picture. It's just like it doesn't, which sounds weird because it's what everybody wants, but when you don't have that like physical tangible connection with someone in the room because they're there listening to the music and you're having this moment together, it's kind of it's weird. It's like disassociative or something. So when we did a show at the Roxy, like the first US show we did, sold out, like I think it was like 400 500 people in the room, just like seeing everyone connect to the music, sing the words back, everything then in that moment just made sense. And then that's how like I started getting back into writing. And
it's that thing of like, while you're writing music about like your own personal experiences, like the whole point of like creating music is really to share it with others and like have that kind of connection between listener and artist. And like you've mentioned in past interviews that like you like to keep your lyrics kind of like ambiguous and like non-gendered to create like this like universal idea of relatability.
I'm starting to change that. Fun fact, which
I read all of the lyrics on this album. There's not a single gender in any song, Campbell. Because you did also say that. You did also say that in an interview, and I was like, "Where are the genders?"
That is true. But in saying that, like songs like Midwest are very like blunt, literal, to the point. Like this is what I'm actually going through. Whereas songs on previous records are more like, here's a flowery metaphor and like you don't know what it is. Like here's your own interpretation.
Valid.
And I was like, I want to start writing a little bit more direct. Still non-gendered because I don't really want to gender songs. I don't really care about that. But
I mean, like Pete Wentz in Fall Out Boy has done that too. Like you can't find a Fall Out Boy song with genders in the lyrics either. But like we've talked to a lot of artists about the way that fans interpret songs and how music is like somewhat of a language that listeners can translate into their own lived experience, like the language they speak. And so like, do you feel like as a songwriter and like in the style in which you write, like it allows you some sort of personal distance between the songs and yourself? And then like when you find yourself in conversation with fans, and they're being like, oh, like I listened to this song, this meant so much to me, and you're like, where did you come up with that? Like it
Yeah,
doesn't
that
change, it
happens all
doesn't
the
like
time.
change your feelings about the song as much, because you're like, oh well, I did that for a reason for them to do that.
Yeah, songwriting's, to be completely honest, I feel like most of the time when I write a song, I have no idea what I'm writing about. I feel like it's almost like going to therapy and then, you feel like you're in a good place and you're like, I don't need to go today. I'm good. And then you go and then all of these feelings and emotions just pour out of you and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And it's like, I feel like songwriting is similar to that because it's not like I plan like exactly what I'm going to write. Maybe I know subconsciously what I will say, but some moments it's like, wow, I just wrote this whole song. I just wrote all these lyrics. And in that specific moment, I might have an idea of what it means, but usually I won't figure it out till like a week, 6 months later, maybe sometimes a year, because songs and songwriting is something that I view as quite dynamic. So it should change over time. I don't think a song necessarily has to have like the exact same meaning all the time. And then it's like, there's my meaning, there's your meaning, someone else's meaning. A lot of people, I think it's cute. A lot of people think my songs are love songs like all the time. And it's like, no, they're not. But I appreciate that some people think that. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting experience. And especially like as soon as that song goes out into the world, it's not really yours anymore. It's everybody's to dissect and mangle and interpret as they wish.
That's really interesting because like also in like reading interviews that you've done, like you've been so forthcoming about like your personal mental health issues, which I find very admirable, because like a lot of other artists will be like, oh yeah, I struggle with mental health, but like don't go into specifics.
That's the conversation.
And it's like kind of just like, okay, like I struggle, that's it. And it's like, okay, that's relatable, but and so I think like the fact that it was just it was really interesting to like kind of see the juxtaposition of like your songs being kind of like, okay, I can interpret this how I want. And then in interviews, you're like so comfortable being so like explicitly honest about your personal struggles, which I don't think a lot of artists do. So do you feel like the like pseudo lyrical ambiguity that you have and then like the honesty you have in interviews is like something you've done consciously to like balance out how like forthcoming you are?
Not particularly. I think in terms of honesty and like interviews or conversations, I just genuinely like talking about mental health, and I think it's a stigma that needs to continue to be broken down.
100%.
Especially like as a man, that's a funny sentence to say, but going to therapy and just being really open about these thoughts and feelings, especially because like I spent 3 years in therapy, and at first I was just going because I was like, I think I have like a generalized anxiety or depression or something like that, and we were trying to just navigate through that and figure it out, and then finally getting to that point where it's like, okay, there's actually something deeper here, and being able to have that conversation and get that diagnosis of pure OCD. And then I've found that by doing that, it's almost become this strength of mine to have so much like emotional empathy towards others and just have those conversations, because it comes up so often in songwriting. If I'm doing songwriting with other people, it's like people come in every day and they're like, oh, I'm going through this, oh, I'm going through that. And you have to know how to be able to talk about those feelings, and you want to be able to write a song, and the most important part of the song is the emotional weight of it. Like it has to connect with other people. Like that's so paramount. That's why people listen to music. So I don't know, I just like talking about it. I find it fun to talk about, even though it's like a big scary topic. I find it really fun.
That's incredible. And like Jenna and I have had like conversations before, like on the podcast, and also just like with other male guests that come on the podcast, just about like the stigma around mental health and how the conversation hadn't really moved until maybe like a decade ago, and like even more so with like male mental health, maybe the last like 5 to 7 years. And so it is like very important, because there are like countless artists that come out and are like, oh yeah, this album's about mental health, and then don't really talk about it. And it's like, okay, I understand I can interpret the music you're putting out to understand what you mean, but like you're not going to help move the conversation forward unless you're going to like actually have the conversation.
I think something that really annoys me as well is that it's almost becoming trendy, and there's a certain language of like pop psychology that gets thrown around a lot. I think it's great that we were all talking about it, but I think there has to be some nuance and depth to it as well, because I think it's great to write a song about like, ooh, I have anxiety, but like let's talk about that a bit deeper. Let's not use it because it's trendy buzzwords on TikTok or Instagram. Let's actually try to dissect that language and try to understand what it means, and not dilute the meaning in the same way that say like gaslight, toxic, like those words don't carry any weight anymore. And even I tend to find now as well, it's like neurodivergent is a word that's lost meaning, and it's like being a person actually is neurodivergent. It's like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
'Cause that actually affects me, like, and it affects others.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so all this is really interesting because I mean, you're kind of like when you're going into the studio to write, it's very much like you said, like you're like, sometimes I don't know what's going to come out. And then it's like going to therapy and there's all these things like bubbling at the surface that like you didn't even realize. It's just very interesting because I feel like it's like this process of like getting it out there, having time to sit and reflect on it. Then it's like the record is coming out and you're like, okay, now I'm like, now that I have some distance between like myself when I wrote it to now, I'm realizing like I can like talk about it in a more comfortable place of this is what I was going through and kind of tie some of those things together so that by the time you get to doing something like a promotional cycle, you're like willing, but also like able to talk about it from like a different kind of headspace.
Yeah, totally. Because it's not as raw or in the moment.
Yeah. Cause I think sometimes when you're in the middle of going through it, you almost like don't necessarily realize what you're going through. And like even you like mentioning like getting your diagnosis where it felt like it helped you like understand a lot more. Like I feel like that's kind of like a commonality we've seen with some of our artists that we've spoken to is like when they're songwriting, they're getting things out and it's like not until later that you kind of look at it from a different perspective.
It's so funny writing a song and then like you want to show your bandmates and you're like, okay, I'm going to hit play and you hit spacebar and you'll just stand in a room really awkwardly for like 3 or 4 minutes. And it's like they just hearing all the lyrics for the first time. You're like, oh my God.
Like, this is my deepest, darkest secrets. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh no.
So you say that about like giving that to your band, but do you feel any kind of way when now you're like giving it to an audience of people?
I don't know. I wish I had an answer for that. If anything, it's kind of funny to me. I'm like, oh wow, there's all these thoughts and feelings and now it's out into the world. It almost doesn't feel like me anymore. It's just like, that's past me. And I'm like, that's cool. That's really sick that he went and did all these things. And now it's out into the world. Again, it's something that's dynamic. It'll change over time. It'll change when I start to perform these songs live for the first time. Yeah. It'll change depending on what the visuals are for the show, the merchandise, how people connect with it, how I curate that experience with my band members and our team. Yeah, it's just something that's always ever changing. So I'm excited to see how that goes.
Yeah. So in thinking of like when you go to tour these songs or even the experiences you've had so far touring, I'm sure like there's an aspect of fans coming up and wanting to have like some pretty deep conversations with you about, you know, mental health or other struggles they've been through. And I know like that can be a difficult thing to do if, you know, it's like you're meeting this person for the first time, but they've listened to all of your songs. And so they have like kind of like this parasocial relationship with you. But then it's like on top of that, there's also like the emotional highs and lows of touring. So it's like emotional highs and lows of interacting with people, but as well, just like the energy exchange, you know?
It's a lot. Whilst I find it a really gratifying and like humbling experience to have people tell me what they're going through and how they relate to the songs and such when we get to talk after a show, I think sometimes you can hear it so many times that it almost loses meaning, which sounds kind of terrible. But like, for instance, the amount of times I've heard people say like, oh, this song helped me get through a breakup, or oh, this song helped me get through this. It's just like, oh, that's fantastic. But it's like with every time I hear that, I can only give so much back. And it's like, the first person to have ever said that to me would have gotten the full emotional like depth of that. And now I feel like I'm just giving like a blanket like NPC response.
Thank you for your time.
No, I do. It genuinely does mean a lot to me. I'm not going to be that person.
No, I mean, like, it can be twofold. Like, you're a human with emotions. Like, it can both mean a lot to you and also be like, what, like, it can also be confusing to know how to react, like, after you have like a similar conversation with different people, because again, it's like that thing where you like see somebody like hot on the airplane and they're like your hot airplane crush, but like they have like a whole life with like gossip and problems that like you're unaware of, but like for you, they're just like a character you're gonna like text your friends about like after the plane lands. And so it's like that thing where like these are people with multitudes, and to them, like, you are like a main character in their life because of your music, but to you,
which is too much. And I always try and use the strategy of like throwing the conversation back onto them, because people are like, oh, you got me into music, and I'm like, that's cool, that's really like, that's sick. I'm trying hard not to swear, but I'm like, that's sick. And I'm like, okay, so tell me about your band. How long have you been playing for? Like, I will just shoot every possible question I can at them because that's more interesting to me. I don't want them to ask
Yeah.
all these questions that I've
Well,
already
okay,
answered.
this is like, yeah, no, this is really interesting because Sarah and I have talked about how like certain bands will have like a really strong community fan base around them, and fans will be like, oh, like they did this for me, they did this for me, but like what it comes down to is fans creating things with each other to build community. And like you're just saying, like once you release an album, it feels like it's not necessarily yours anymore, like it's for everyone. And so it's almost like there's this aspect of like, in like you're saying, you're having these conversations with fans, and there's this aspect of like it's almost more about them, and like maybe should be more about them.
No, totally. I think we've tried to like find ways to engage with fans, whether that's, for instance, the Wild West tour, where it's like we just want to see everybody dress up as cowboys and cowgirls. And
yeah,
that's what everyone did, and it was just like really beautiful to see everyone share their photos and like talk to each other, and just really cute ways of doing that. But no, I do think community is paramount when it comes to this kind of thing, and especially like the longevity of a band. And I do want to try and find more ways, because I don't want to be just like we play like indie music and we're four white dudes, so it's like the most bland vanilla combination you could possibly get. And it's like, how can we differentiate ourselves from other indie bands like that, you know? Like
100%. But also it's like back to the point we made earlier about like how even just like making friends as an adult is hard, and like having something like music in common with other people is such a big thing. And so it's just like that interesting thing of like when bands like talk about like creating like a community and like being part of that community, I'm like, you don't need to be a part of it because it's not for you. It's for your fans to make friends with like-minded people, because like at the end of the day, no matter how much us as music fans like want to be like, oh yes, like I'm part of this community with Harry Styles, and if I met him, we'd be buddies. Like it's not gonna happen. But you can be friends with the people that are standing next to you and experiencing that show together, and like who find deep, important meaning in that music. And so I just think like that aspect of it is really cool, and kind of bringing it back to the fans when they're like, oh, you helped me through a breakup, and it's like, okay, let's talk about your breakup instead of my breakup.
Yeah, no, totally, because like it's all there in song, like you already know, like I want to know about you kind of thing. I hope fans are like actually engaging with each other though, because the last Tourzilla, some shows like people were really invested and like singing and dancing and crying, and there was so much engagement. I remember at the New York show we play a song called Glow, and there was like a slow dance circle pit, like people were just like holding each other and dancing, and like it was really cute. And then you go to some other shows and people are just not doing anything, like and then they like just completely blank stare, like, or they're on their phone just recording the whole concert, and then they tell you afterwards that was the best show of their life. Or, you know, then they have that emotional outpour to you, and you're just like, really? Like, are you sure about that? I find it really difficult to connect with that when you're just not doing anything. Like, it's a strange thing. I'm assuming it's like Gen Z iPad babies struggling with a pandemic.
I mean, honestly, maybe some people going to their first concerts for the first time. I feel like a lot of, I don't know, teenagers.
We asked that. We asked that as a question. We're like, is this anyone's first show? And a lot of hands go up.
Oh, wow.
Which is so fair. I remember my first few shows, I was like, whoa, what is going on? What do I do? But it's like, I'm curious to see over the next couple of years if like people will start moshing or start dancing, or it's like, you know, it's okay to do these things at a show. It's what happens.
Well, I also wonder if part of it is like this politics of politeness almost, of like,
I think it is.
Because you guys posted that one reel that's really funny of someone being like, yes, sir. And then the person like, shut the F up. Like, and
oh, that killed me. That was so funny.
That video brings me joy often. Like I think about it. Like sometimes I'll just go watch it on loop, you know, like for a laugh. But that is so real.
I don't understand what compels some people to do the things they do at shows. It's like, okay, so we're not singing the words, we're not dancing, we're not moshing, we're not doing anything, but we will throw things on stage. We will use our phones as like a billboard to like advertise to the artist like certain requests. It almost feels as if we were like a prop or something on stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so weird. It's so strange to see how like show etiquette has changed over time.
Now that you're at this stage, comparatively having grown up being a music fan, like were there experiences like at concerts or just like your relationship to other artists, like looking up to, aspiring to other artists that you feel like you learned from and bring into the way you operate now?
So I didn't get into music like seriously till I was about 14 or 15.
Yeah.
And it was because one of my best friends had Guitar Hero 3. and I would go to his house all the time, sometimes to literally just play the game. And I got so good at it that I could play some songs like medium difficulty without looking at the screen. And I was like, I have a problem. Like, I need to play a real guitar. And my oldest brother was in some hardcore bands. So he had a guitar, picked it up, started going onto YouTube and learning how to play like Iron Man by Black Sabbath. And then from there, just became like a very annoying indie kid at school that listened to like Radiohead and Neutral Milk Hotel and just thought they were superior. So from there, there's a venue in Sydney called the Enmore Theatre. I would always get the train down to see bands. So like My Bloody Valentine, Slowdive, Godspeed You Black Emperor, like a lot of shoegaze and post-rock bands. But I would always get that train down and get the train back at like 1 a.m. I don't think I'd get back till like 5 a.m. Back to Newcastle, walk back home.
Wow.
But a lot of those like early years were like quite formative from just going to shows and seeing these big productions and like, you know, realizing it's like, oh, cool, you can actually like make a career out of this and express yourself. And that's just something so incredible. And I just did not understand it and I wanted to know more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's also interesting. I mean, coming back to kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning, like I think it's also interesting that like you were making music at a time like when SoundCloud and YouTube were really big and as far as music discovery. And like I was really big into SoundCloud and I discovered like a lot of honestly British bands like from there.
Bring it back. Like it needs to come back.
Like the way TikTok operates is just so wildly different. And so I mean, I don't know, I guess kind of just revisiting what we already said, it's like you experienced like baby TikTok before TikTok existed. And like not even in the same way, but just more of a slow paced social media platform.
Yeah. I loved SoundCloud so much because it felt like Facebook, but purely for musicians. Because I could listen, I could go listen to someone else's song, but then I could also leave a comment. I could send them a DM, could collab with people.
And I mean, also like thinking of how far you've come in your career. And like, we're talking about this being 10 years later. And you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to revisit, like we were talking about like, you know, for fans coming to your show, it's kind of funny because they see you, the fans are like, oh, this is a rock star. And they're like, you've made it. Like but it's like, but
no, I get it. I just like, I always try to break down that barrier because people are like, oh my God, like you're a somebody. I'm like, shut the fuck, like you're good. Like tell me about you. I'm just a dude with a guitar. I'm a dude. You're a dude. Like let's talk about being dudes, you know? Like,
but I think, no, I totally get that. But there's this sense of like, oh, you were following a dream and like, quote unquote, you made it. And I feel like it's one of those things where it's like you turned your passion into the thing that also is your life's work that makes you money. And so like, are you able to separate your passion for music or does it just feel like a 24/7 never ending job?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember I was working 2 casual jobs in hospitality when I was about 21, 22. And then I think we had about maybe 300,000 monthly listeners by that point. And it was like, we were getting just enough Spotify royalties that I could quit both those jobs and just live off what I was earning. And I think I was earning maybe like $250 a week. And I was like, cool, I'm just going to run with this and take it as far as I possibly can. And it's just snowballed from there. But I think maybe that is, again, sort of in a similar vein of like songwriting and like finding meaning in it and what you're trying to express. It's a similar thing of like, it is just dynamic. And there are some sessions that, you know, feel like work because you're trying to figure out how to best express this idea and you're not quite getting it, whether it's like a drum sound or like the vocal takes just aren't hitting in the way that you want, or maybe you're working with somebody and it's just not quite panning out, or I don't know. It definitely does feel like work on some days, but I would much rather be doing this than anything else.
Yeah. When we were talking about like going from the album that you released in 2020 to this one, like there's an aspect of feeling like you want to keep up both like the artistry, like continue to be able to produce like artistry on the same level, but also just like this steam of people continuing to care and like the pressures that come with that.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised that people have hung around, like, because it's been 4 years since the last album. But like, for real though, like I don't know. I didn't know when it was gonna come out. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna start writing, and then it's like there's still people there listening to it and connecting with the music. If anything, there's more people than ever. I don't know. It's such a rhetorical question. Like, I don't know, but I'm just really grateful for it. Like, how does any of this work? The music industry is such a like magical wonderland that makes no sense.
Do you feel like there's pressure between albums to be like, not from the label, like personal pressure to be like seen on the internet, like between albums? So it's like as to keep you forefront in your fans' minds when you're like, I know there's more music in me, I just don't know when it's gonna come?
Not so much to be seen on the internet, because I feel like I can just sort of play like adult peekaboo and make a post like once every 6 months and be like, hey, I'm still here. And if anything, people are like, oh my God, they're back. Oh, and then it just creates this like false PR spin. But
Yeah.
I think like if anything, there can be some frustration where it's like, okay, well, I want to start writing more music, but you can't express it. And
Yeah.
it feels like you've got this wall or this boundary up, and it's like, well, what's it going to take for me to get over that so that I can start expressing myself again? And it's hard too, because it's like, well, it's worse when you know what you want to write about, but you can't find any way to express that. You're like, oh, these chords aren't working, or this guitar tone's not right, or it just feels so silly at that point.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I do feel like we could continue this conversation for literal hours, and then we could charge you like we're a therapist, but we do. So for a last question, we have a question that we like to ask everybody, and it's that like the ethos of Name 3 Songs is to empower fangirls. We think it's important to be critical consumers, but also celebrate the things we love unapologetically. So Campbell, what are you a fangirl of?
I am a fangirl of production, because the way that you produce a song informs the emotional output of the song. Because it's like, for instance, a song like Young or Telephones, they were just recorded in a bedroom or a living room with very limited amounts of experience and equipment, but there's still some level of emotional depth to it, which is why it's gone as far as it has. And I find that so interesting. It's like this never-ending rabbit hole. It's like I'm just going to keep going down, and I want to keep chasing ways to make people feel a certain way, because that is songwriting. But again, it's like what choices you make, whether it's like how the drums sound, what delays you use, what guitar tone you use, all inform the final product and how people connect with it. So that's something I definitely fangirl out and nerd out a lot about. Also something I would be interested in like doing some kind of YouTube series, and like, you know, to try and engage more with fans and creating that community and being like, this is how I do things.
Yeah.
How do you do things? Almost like a masterclass or like just a little 101. I think it'd be cute, because it's like I find it really fun when people are like, oh, this is how I got this sound, or this is how I did this thing. And it just breaks down that barrier. And it's like, wow, anybody can do it. There's so much gatekeeping in the music industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of producers are just old white dudes. And it's like, well, I'm not going to share these secrets. And it's like, why? Like, no one's going to be able to do it exactly like you can do it.
Yeah.
But maybe they can do something else. And that's exciting. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that would be a very fun way to engage like both the things that you love and also like have a conversation with fans.
Yeah, totally. So that's I fangirl out a lot about like analog gear, microphones, pedals, all kinds of stuff.
We are very happy for producer Campbell and to see what you continue to produce in the future. I want to give a big congratulations on the album, and we're so excited it's out in the world. And thank you, Campbell, for joining us today.
That's okay. Thank you so much for having me.
I love this idea of once the music is out there, it's no longer for Campbell, it is for the fans. I love that so much, because like in so many other interviews we've done, we've talked with other artists about like, and we talked about it today too, we've talked about how like everybody interprets lyrics in their own way and all of this, and Campbell's like, yeah, the music's not mine anymore. Like I gave it to the fans for the fans to like figure out what it means to them and enjoy the music and have it do for them what music does for music listeners. And I just think like that's really beautiful.
I think it is beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a lot of artists are like so, I don't know, view their music as like their child, and they're so like protective over it and stuff. And Campbell's like, it's not mine. It's not for me anymore.
I think it's really special. And I also like what Campbell was saying about kind of like his interaction with fans, wanting it to like him to get to know this person who like loves his music so deeply, because obviously this person, you know, already knows a certain aspect of Campbell, and Campbell being able to have a two-way interaction with fans. I think that's really great.
Yeah. The whole idea of being like, you already know my story, I want to hear yours. Like, I just think that that's another thing of just proving how much like music can be a community, and like artists continuing to like give roses to their fans for creating something off the back of what they've done, rather than being like, oh, they created that, like I'm the reason why this exists. And it's like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, we really got to touch on so many great topics today, including mental health and, you know, the dealing with being perceived as someone quite literally on the stage and finding home. And I think really it was such a great conversation with Campbell being able to talk about these topics. So thanks for getting candid with us and Campbell from Vacations. This has been Sarah and Jenna from Name 3 Songs. If you have thoughts, feelings, questions, concerns, come chat with us over at Name 3 Songs on Instagram or TikTok.
And to get your pop culture fix, you can listen to new episodes of Name 3 Songs podcast every Wednesday. And until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.